The item that we'll be talking about tonight is a proposed policy dealing with closures of city streets and city right-of-way for a variety of uses. And within that policy, there are a number of different components. They are the objective section. There's a background section on procedures and conditions, and then general provisions, what happens for non-compliance with permits, and then contact information. So we'll talk about really all of those in a little more detail, with the exception of the general provisions and contact information, fairly explanatory when you look at the document in your packet. The policy objective, the first section, is really pretty straightforward. It's really to provide a consistent and predictable methodology. Just that easy. We have a lot of permits that are processed, a lot of street closure requests that are received every year, and we want to make sure that we are providing a process and a set of standards and criteria that are used when we look at those applications that are consistent, that are equitable, and that are applied evenly throughout the year and throughout from year to year for all the different types of uses that people propose. In the background section, there's a number of things within there, but it's really, it talks about the fact that there are multiple requests that are received every year. I believe in 2013, the engineering department processed about 190 individual permits within the department. Of those, approximately 40% were related to street closures of some kind. So it's a fairly substantial number that comes through on an annual basis. They take many different forms. The type of uses that people are requesting can be parades, block parties, some kind of a fundraiser event, social events for dances and block parties. Construction projects, of course, are a large component of what we do. There are a certain amount of fun runs, little marches along the sidewalks, rallies, musical shows, just all different types of forms. So as part of the policy, we've tried to categorize those somewhat to, again, be able to put some consistency in how we deal with them. One of the bigger sections that's in there, it talks about procedures. How are we going to process the applications that are received for closures of public right-of-way? And keeping in mind that, I'll keep calling it public right-of-way because we have to remember that these are public streets and alleys and sidewalks and property that are there for the benefit of the public, to be used daily by the public in transportation, recreation, commerce, all of those things that happen within public streets. That's important when we start thinking about, okay, if we're going to close those streets, what are the impacts? Why are we closing it? Is there a good reason to close it? Is it something that can be done safely? I mean, those kind of things come into our consideration of applicants' permits when they submit them to us. So the Engineering Division of Public Works takes all of those applications. We review those with the Street Department for most of those types of applications today. For some, such as parades, we do bring in the Parks and Recreation Department, Police Department, and Fire Department. Those bigger ones that have a larger impact require additional resources, or in the case of fire, could hinder response times to events or for medical situations. There are fees associated with street closures, and those are established through the fee schedule every year as adopted by the City Council. And it's anticipated that there will be revisions related to the policy in this upcoming fee schedule, if it is not something that we actually bring forward earlier than the summer. It's a consideration based on what the council chooses to do with the policy and the timing of those actions. Within the conditions section, we've broken it out really into 4 different categories: parades, community events, neighborhood block parties, and construction closures. Now, parades are pretty obvious. You know what those are. We see the University of Idaho Homecoming Parade. We see a Light Up the Night Parade. You might see a Mardi Gras Parade. High school has parades once in a while. Different types that do occur. And primarily they're downtown on Main Street. Occasionally we'll see them, for instance, for the high school somewhere else. Community events are those types of activities that are not parades but often occur in the downtown area, so they're along Main Street. It may be something like a Trinity Fest or a New Art block party or something of that nature that is on Main Street or some other major street in the system. But it's not a parade, but it does require street closures. It's open to the public. There's different activities that go along with it. The neighborhood block parties are fairly obvious, as would be construction closures. Within the policy, we've set some parameters that we feel are appropriate to put some limitations on the use of that public right-of-way so that it doesn't get excessive and so that it can be equally shared amongst different events that may be ongoing. And so we don't want them to be too long or too many days, but we do want to make it as usable as we can, balancing the needs of the public and particularly in the case of downtown, those downtown businesses that may be impacted by events. So for parade closures within the policy, some of the initial conditions that we've recommended would be that there be some duration limitations. So 8 hours closure per day for parades. That gives you staging time, preparation, event time, and then clean up and pick up when you're done. So an 8-hour maximum between the hours of 7 a.m. and midnight, 1 day per weekend, so not a 2-day type of an event. And there would be the ability for exceptions to those limitations to be granted by the city supervisor. One of the provisions that's in there is that parades cannot conflict with the farmers market. And there's, of course, the one exception, which we're all aware of, which is the University of Idaho Homecoming, which predates the farmers market, even though the market's been around as long as it has. And the council has taken action in this last year to allow the University of Idaho Homecoming Parade to continue on Main Street while the market moved temporarily back to the Jackson Street parking lot. We've anticipated that that situation would probably occur again. But other than that, the provision that's in here would be that no other parades and other events would conflict with the market. So the market has the priority on those days on Main Street. A change that's in here in a number of the different situations or classifications has to do with cost. Historically, we have charged a permit fee, a street closure fee for parades and for closures of the public right-of-way, but that has not come anywhere close to matching the costs that the city incurs, be it in public works and police primarily, could be a little bit in parks, could be a little bit in fire, related to actually setting up and monitoring and administering the event itself. So the policy does specify that the actual costs or costs that are established based on a formula of the expected work for different types of closures is what would be charged. And so the idea there is to recover the city's costs for these events so that the city's not just subsidizing every event that comes into the city. Again, there's always the opportunity if the council or with the authority given to the council to the city administrator to waive fees if that is the desire for certain types of events. And insurance coverage would be required. So for parades in this case, we would look for a certain amount of insurance to be carried by the sponsor of the event, with the city named as an additional insured in the event that something were to occur during the event. In the community event closures, this one's a little bit of the catch-all. So this is the one that has, we want to put a band on the Main Street by 2nd. We've seen that here in the last couple of years, and have a nighttime music event, close the street, have some dancing, that type of thing. Some of the other events further down around Friendship Square that I mentioned earlier, they come in many different shapes and sizes, but they all have some similarities in that where they typically occur, the types of things that can go on there. We have set some duration or recommended some duration requirements. Again, 8 hours per event, 7 a.m. to midnight on the same day, 1 day per weekend. So very similar to the parade event. Again, exceptions by the city supervisor if that is warranted. And city costs would be covered and insurance would be required. So essentially the same requirements as we recommended for the parade itself. Neighborhood block parties. Now, these are a bit interesting in that we've heard the council in the past express interest in encouraging block parties throughout the city. So how can we accommodate that but also recognize that, again, we're closing public streets, disrupting traffic flow. There's a little bit of exposure when you're using public street for events. How do we make them manageable such that they're not onerous, or the requirements are not onerous for people that want to do this, but also provide enough coverage for the city and the general public as a whole. So in this case, we've set a duration of 8 hours per event from 8 a.m. to dusk. And the dusk in this case is because once you go to nighttime operations, street closure signage goes to a different type. And so there are certain types that are allowed under the standards for nighttime operation versus daytime. So it's just a different setup. 1 day per weekend, so again, we're not looking for multiple day type events. And that approved traffic control devices would be the responsibility of the applicant. Within the policy, we do give an option that's in there that, yes, applicant, you are responsible to take care and provide the traffic control. Has to meet the MUTCD standards, our adopted standard, the city requirements. They can do that a couple of ways. Either they can go out and hire a traffic control firm, which obviously has a cost attached to it. And the reason for that is that they're providing the signage, but they're also providing the expertise of a certified traffic control specialist to design the traffic control and to install and remove the traffic control. That's a requirement these days. We can do that as a city as well, and so the alternative to them hiring somebody, in essence, is to hire our street department. We would provide that signage. There would be fees within the fee schedule, and some of these are already there, that establish what the rate is for signage rental, and then we would have to establish some rates for the staff time to go out and set up and remove the signage when they're done. As these happen on the weekends, we may be dealing with some overtime weekend pay aspects as well. But that would be an alternative where, again, trying to help folks maybe make it as simple as we can. They don't have to go out and find a traffic control firm. Perhaps we can, give them a reasonable cost alternative where that we could just set that up on their behalf. As far as the insurance side of it, if you look in the policy, you'll see a nice large OR in there and highlighted. That's because they put that in there so that there's a question that I would like the council to consider on that item. And what we've said is that either they're required to provide insurance coverage, just like parades and other downtown type events, or they would be allowed to operate without insurance if they signed an agreement with the city, basically releasing the city from liability from anything that happens with their event. And so that's one that I think the council would be beneficial if you could weigh in on how you would like to see that progress, and then we can modify the policy accordingly. There's always a question about, can private parties get insurance for events? And so we have done some research, and there is at least one firm here locally that does event insurance, and they have indicated that neighborhood block parties are eligible for what they call special event policies. They would range in the price from $165 to $350 or $15 based on expected attendance at the event. So there, it is possible to get event insurance as a private individual for a block party or something like that. Obviously, there's a cost attached to that. So that's something to think about as compared to the issues of potential exposure for the city in the event that something is set up, something happens at the event, it is a city street, will be pulled into any kind of a litigation if such thing occurs, and then how does that factor out? So that's why that's in there as a question, something for the council to consider how you'd like to proceed on that particular aspect.